Thank you, Jeanette, for inviting me today. Thank you to everybody else for attending. My name is Julie Anderson. I am a linguist. I'm most interested in minority languages and projects that support linguistic diversity. I most recently worked with the PanLex project, where we created a very large lexical translation database involving 5,600 languages. I also have a background in nonprofit management, and these things bring me to Translation Commons. But the job that I think most brings me to Translation Commons is one that I did when I was 17 years old, when I joined a group that sent me to Colombia, South America, to participate in vaccinating children against measles. I was stationed in several very small mountain towns in the Andes, and this was a very rich experience for me to be immersed in the culture of the Colombian people who lived there and learn Spanish. Very important experience in my life. And one of the things that I experienced was I saw the Arawak Indians who had been pushed off of their land up higher into the mountains, where it was very hard for them to grow their crops. And so they were having trouble subsisting. And sometimes they would come into the village to consult the doctor, and his prescription to them was often to eat food instead of using coca leaves to stave off hunger, which they were doing because they were having trouble growing their crops because they were pushed out of their normal area where they lived. So this experience was very important for me as an impressionable 17-year-old, and that cultural experience has stayed with me for my whole life. And I think that is one of the reasons that I appreciate being involved in Translation Commons and the Language Digitization Initiative. So I have been volunteering with Translation Commons for about a year and a half now. And today I will be presenting a document that we have created in the Language Digitization Initiative. So let me share my screen and see what I have for you here. I have co-written with Texan the Language Data Gathering Guidelines, which I will talk about today. First, I will give you a little bit of background about the Language Digitization Initiative, the LDI. I'll give you some context for the guidelines that I'm talking about today, and an overview of the contents of that guidelines. First, a little background about Language Digitization Initiative. Translation Commons partnered with the United Nations International Year of Indigenous Languages and established the LDI. And the purpose of the LDI is to support language communities that want to bring their language online. In other words, guide them in how to create every level of the technology stack required to make a language usable online. So the first document that was created is the Zero to Digital, which is an outline. And that expanded into a series of guidelines. The project will also include workshops, tutorials, and there's already a resource page on the Translation Commons website. And it's all about what all is needed to bring a language into full digital capacity. So I'd like to just say why the LDI is important to me. We know that there are about 7,000 languages spoken in the world today, but only several hundred that have strong digital support. That means that all the other languages cannot yet be used on digital devices. those language communities cannot access information online in their native language. This not only puts them at a disadvantage in accessing information when they need it, but it also puts pressure on the abandonment of native and local languages in favor of adoption of the official language, where education, commerce, and opportunity are emphasized, and thus potentially increasing the pace of language extinction. I guess we have some background noise from the construction going on. So the advances in technology over the past decades, by enhancing the capabilities of the big languages, have unwittingly contributed to this trend and even accelerated it. However, wouldn't it be interesting if technology itself could be an instrument to reverse the trend? I subscribe to the belief that if technology and translation support are developed in the smaller languages, the minoritized languages, the underdocumented languages, then the pressure to abandon those languages may be decreased. Translation Commons directly supports marginalized languages through both technology support like the LDI and also the development of translators and interpreters, helping to grow the translation industry, including in Indigenous languages. The hope is that these efforts will have an effect, along with many other efforts by other people, to slow the rate of language extinction and help democratize access to information and opportunity, as well as enrich the world with more knowledge of the otherwise marginalized languages. So that's why it's important to me to be involved in the LDI. The document I will talk about today is the Language Data Gatherings Guidelines. And you can see here that it is in a series of guidelines that are being produced. We have already heard from Sue Ellen about the terminology guidelines, the mentoring guidelines, the Indigenous translators and interpreters guidelines are coming along. We've heard from Kirti about the machine translation guidelines and the internship guidelines that's also being written. So you can see that, practically speaking, the language data gathering guidelines comes first in the list because a community will first need to gather the data on their language before they can take the other steps towards digitization. The purpose of this guideline is to help a language community understand what types of language data need to be collected. And we give them a process to do so, and we discuss the coordination with technology experts that can help with digitizing their language. The structure of the document, basically we tell them the kinds of data to collect, the process for data collection, and how those kinds of data support computer systems. That is the main meat of the matter of the document, and that is what I will spend, what I will review today. The other sections of the document include specialized utilities, we have a glossary, and we have a few appendices. We have attempted to write this guidelines for the lay audience. We do not assume a background in linguistics or computer science. We understand that community leaders may themselves be computer scientists or linguists, but we do not assume that background. We've tried to make the document accessible basically to the general public. And we've also presented the information in the document in multiple formats. So we first explain, usually in paragraph form, and then we take the same data and present it in a bullet point list. We take the same data and present it in a table, or a list of questions so that we can appeal to different kinds of readers and just make the information accessible to the most people. So, first part of the document, what kinds of data need to be gathered? We try to impress upon the reader that a wide variety of data is needed to support digitization. They may think, well, we have videotapes of some performances and we have a translation dictionary. Let's get started. Let's digitize our language. And it's true, that is a fine starting place, but they will need many more kinds of data in order to support digital applications. And so we list as many as we can think of. We also try to impress upon them that a large volume of any of these kinds of data is best if it's available. So what I would like to do is basically go through the list of all of the kinds of data that we could think of, and I'd love to get your feedback if you could think of any additional kinds that we should include in the list. So here is the kinds of data that we suggest people collect. First of all, handwritten correspondence and printed documents. So this may be any kind of handwritten documents and printed documents. Texts and books in their language of any subject. Monolingual and translation dictionaries and grammars will certainly be needed. Regulatory documents such as birth records, marriage records, death records, any government records. Educational materials and children's storybooks and picture books will be important. Newspapers, signage, and posters are also going to be helpful. Archaic writing, we encourage people to gather archaic writing as well as modern versions on any medium, like on paper, on lawn tar, palm leaves, and sometimes there will be more than one script that the language is written in, so we encourage them to collect any materials they can in any script, archaic or modern. If they have language data on websites or on social media, that will be important. The social media is a good source of informal writing or informal language usage often, so that'll be important. We want both formal and informal examples. Any audio and video recordings will be very important to collect. Recordings of songs, poetry, performances, recordings of oral histories and traditions, and also artwork, drawings, and photographs often have language data on them, and they provide important context. And recordings of everyday conversation, whether it's formal or informal, community knowledge, and language use from living speakers. So there may be new materials created by living speakers, whether it is stories they are recording or oral histories or translations. So I believe this is the full list that we have suggested. I'd be very interested to get your feedback if you can think of additional things that we should include. The next section talks about the process. So we suggest a process for them to collect the data on their language. First, they're going to need to think about the credible sources of language data and invite those those people to be involved. Who are the people that they want to be involved in this project? And what kinds of language data do they think they have available in their community that they would consider to be important for this project? They need to accept the language data contributions that come forward. They need to put them into a digital format. If they have recordings, can those be converted to digital recordings? If they have handwritten materials, can those be scanned? Might something be retyped if they have keyboards available in their language? Everything must be put into digital format so that it can be uploaded into a repository. You need to establish a repository to retain all of these materials. They also need to verify the rights to use and publish them and become familiar with whatever the laws are in their region for publishing materials. The owners of some of the materials may not want them made published for the public, but it's possible that in the repository they can create different levels of access so that it's possible that somebody may allow their correspondence, private correspondence, to be used to help create keyboards or fonts or whatever, but not want those documents to be made public. So it'll be possible to have different levels of access in the repository to respect that. Annotating the contributions is also important because they'll want to have the date that the material was created, the date it was collected, the notations on who the speakers are, what are the age of the speakers, or any other aspects of the speakers that tell about their status or their relative status to each other, because this may give knowledge about language use. And also the location, because this could help with dialect questions. So they'll need to establish a group who can review the data in the repository, who can help to annotate it and authenticate it, and sometimes go back to the original source, get more information, make corrections and so forth, and approve it for publishing in the repository. And the final step, publishing at the different levels of access. So that's, in a nutshell, the process that we suggest, which of course we explain at length, and this is a bullet point summary. We suggest that they can gather materials in any order that works for them. They might just decide to gather what's most readily available. They might take the approach that they want to target certain apps that they're interested in and then go after the particular data that will support those apps. Or they might decide to just gather everything and preserve it and let the decisions happen later down the road as to what applications that data might be applied for or applied to. We suggest that the process is iterative so that they don't have to take the approach of saying, well, let's get all of our translation dictionaries and all of our word lists collected first, and then we'll move on to video recordings or something like that. They may find that it's most useful to take the iterative approach so they can collect what's available. New materials may be created by native speakers, and as community gets more involved, more information, more items may come out of the woodwork. Also, the reviewing of the data is iterative because the reviewers are going to look at the data in the repository and need to go back and confirm it and so forth, maybe make changes. And so that process is also iterative. So here's an example of, this is a screenshot from the document itself. And this is an example of where we take the same information that we've just presented and we repeat it in the form of questions. So having to do with gathering materials, do you have a planned workflow or process for inviting, accepting, and digitizing materials? Who are potential sources of language data? What types of language data materials are available to you? And so on. We have a couple questions about hosting the repository. Have you installed and configured a language data repository? Do you have IT skills to manage the repository? And then we have questions about vetting the data. Have you formed a team of skilled language data reviewers? Do you have guidelines for annotating and vetting language data? Do you have guidelines for requirements to approve language data items to be published, and so forth? And last, we have a section on computer applications. So we talk about how the data they are collecting fits together with computer applications that they're going to be interested in. This is a screenshot of an app that Penlex created. I put it here as a teaser. I will come back to it in a minute. So after explaining in paragraph form all of these connections, we've taken the information, same information, and presented it again in the form of a table. In this table, you see on the left all of the language types. So we have writing samples, sentences and paragraphs, term lists, dictionaries, audio and video recordings, bilingual data, and coined terms. Then we describe the linguistic value of each of those. And on the right, we explain or list the software uses for each of those types of language data. So for example, writing samples help determine character set, font, keyboard layout, input method, and so on. Sentences and paragraphs support word processing and speech processing. And we go on down the list. Coined terms support software menus, commands, dialogues, and so on. I will share another screen to show you the same information that we present in a different configuration. This time on the left, we have all the digital applications, and we have them broken up into 3 groups. So we have communication, so sending and receiving text messages, emails, machine translation, and so forth. Here, next group has to do with publishing. So publishing information on websites, sharing documents, create print and online dictionaries, and so forth. So that's, here, scan documents to convert to digital text, or OCR, create a font for your script, buy and sell things online, websites and applications. So these are examples of the digital applications. The third group here is user interfaces and disability support, such as text-to-speech and speech-to-text. So in this case, on the left, the reader can browse the digital applications to find what they might be most interested in. Then they look across the top to see what kind of language data we suggest they collect in order to support those functions. And these are where all the X's are filled in. This is not meant to be an absolutely complete table. However, it gives people a good starting place. So this is just to show that we are presenting the data, the information, this process in several different ways for people to digest. Now I'm going back to the other screen to share with you. And this next screen, I just want to share this example of an app that Panlex made with to support a project in Bali. In Bali, the Balinese language is written in Latin script, but there's also the historical Balinese script, which is having a resurgence in interest. And so there are a lot of young people, young adults who are getting interested. The university is interested, and the government is supporting it by hiring what they call language scouts. And these language scouts are stationed in different towns throughout Bali, and their job is to discover and look after and help preserve the manuscripts that are written on lontar palm leaves by people, skilled people who use a metal stylus. They carve the letters into the leaf, and then they rub a burnt candle nut over the leaf so that the little grooves take the dark color of the burnt candle nut and make the writing legible. So this is, there are thousands and thousands of manuscripts in Bali on lontar palm leaves. And this, in this app, you can see several things. This brown part here shows you a photograph of one of the lontar palm leaves etched in the historical Balinese script. This lower part shows you an on-screen keyboard that Panlex created to allow a participant to retype or transcribe the contents of this leaf. And this third part in the middle shows you the transcription, the part that they typed. What I think is interesting about this image, it shows several areas, several parts of the digitization process. First of all, the fact that these leaves are photographed and stored at the Internet Archive for the public to view, that is one step in digitization, because they're preserved now and they can be viewed by anybody. Second step is creating this keyboard that allows them to be transcribed. And the third is this record now that exists and is stored on Wikisource, so that there's now another record of, and another record of this object. So what's interesting is the writing on the palm leaf supported the creation of the keyboard. The keyboard supported the creation of the transcription, and the transcription will support further efforts. For example, it can be searched. Materials can, terminology can be extracted from it to make term lists and so forth. So I just, we were very excited to be part of this project, and I love this because it shows several layers at least of a digitization process that is supporting language efforts in a community where people are interested. And I provided a link here in case you want to learn more about it. So the final sections of the document is we have included a section on the CLDR, the Common Locale Data Repository, which we describe for the reader. And we suggest that if they're interested in contributing data on their language to the CLDR, this could help other parties localize apps and websites into their language. We have a couple sections here on machine translation, even though there is a complete guideline on machine translation that is separate. We explain some of the natural language processing tools. For example, a tool that can scan a document and extract words to help create terminology lists and word lists. We have a glossary, and we have a few appendices, including one on the benefits of digitizing a language. I have included the bullet point list here of the benefits to have it handy for you in case this is helpful to you. I won't go through them all, but they have to do with the benefits to the community itself, benefits that for the community interacting with its neighbors, and also benefits for that community to bring their language onto the global stage if they wish to do so. I'd also like to include just a quick note on the rate of language extinction, because this has come up recently a few times, and Irmgarda brought it up last month. This common trope of one language every 2 weeks, it started as a projection in 1992, and it caught the imagination of a lot of people, and it started to get passed around, and it's still being passed around. It's in social media, it's in articles, but it's not actually supported by the data. The Catalog of Endangered Languages does have some data on this, and they have shown that 216 languages went silent in the past 57 years. This is as of 2017. So that is at a rate of 3.7 languages per year. Let's say 4 languages per year. That comes out to 1 language every 3 months. That's already a very alarming statistic, and we need not bump it up or exaggerate it. It is interesting that when this 1 language every 2 weeks trope got passed around, people are sounding the alarm. So I'm glad that they want to sound the alarm, but it's more accurate to say 1 language every 3 months at this point. However, it is a little bit of a slippery statistic, because we can also see here 296 languages have fewer than 10 speakers, 648 have fewer than 100 speakers. So that's precarious, and we don't know what that's going to do in the coming years. We also see that 46% of languages are endangered or have recently fallen silent. That is according to the Catalog of Endangered Languages. And I'm also wondering, what about the effect of the pandemic? Because the pandemic has disproportionately affected the elderly, and it is often the elderly of a community that are the final remaining speakers of an endangered language. So I'm wondering what we're going to learn over the next 5 or so years about what effect this has had on the rate of language extinction. So these are some pretty alarming statistics. We also have some hopeful statistics. In the past 30 years, revitalization efforts have increased in academia, in language communities, in the tech world, and in some governments. Public awareness has increased, and the Catalog of Endangered Languages says that 69 languages are now in the awakening stage, awakening from dormancy. So that's very encouraging. And there's also projects like LDI at Translation Commons. So I offer you those numbers in case they're helpful. Our guidelines is due for publication in May. It will be available on the resources page of the LDI section of the Translation Commons website. I very much appreciate your attention, and I look forward to your questions and your comments. Thank you very much.